Yo. All right. We're going to talk more about GitHub Actions today because not everyone has heard the message about how they need to be checking those repos, especially if you have open source, to make sure you're not susceptible to the increasing number of attacks that are showing up. And I have streamed about this multiple times in the last 3 or 4 months. But I thought I would try to do it better, do it faster, go through more of the things that you need to worry about, and then actually lock down some of my own repos so you can see some of my legacy repos where I maybe haven't locked down all the settings, I haven't done digest checking, I haven't done pinning to these digest SHA hashes. Like, there's a lot of stuff I can do to help really lock down my own GitHub Actions, even though I'm pretty sure none of them are susceptible to these attacks because of the foot guns are everywhere, I feel like, and we need to talk about it. So even if you don't use GitHub Actions, unless you go in and turn off all the settings, someone could actually give a PR to you with a GitHub Action workflow in it, and then you would be running GitHub Actions. So it's kind of on by default, I believe, unless your organization has changed that policy. So yeah, let's get into it. In case you haven't seen one of these before, we'll go through S1ngularity and Shai Hulud and Shai Hulud v2, the second coming. These are all fancy names for exploited attacks on, some are focused on NPM, like there is an NPM component to this. I'm not going to go super in-depth into NPM because most of us aren't shipping NPM packages that we need to protect. But I do want to talk about that because it speaks to a bigger problem around secrets and how do you protect your GitHub token, which is the permission giver. When you're inside of GitHub Actions, you're using an environment variable called GitHub token, which has all the read and write permissions and access to all the secrets in the repo. And there are ways, including mostly how to use deployments, to limit where certain secrets show up. So I'm going to talk about that. If you didn't know, I have a Discord server right here, and we're chatting in there. What's funny is people think I look like XL Real if they're watching. Says I look like this guy, Gabe Newell, in the thumbnail. Well, Gabe's a handsome looking dude. I mean, you know, looks like he's 63. I am 50, so I'm not all completely gray, but maybe in that photo of the thumbnail. All right. Anyway, I take that as a compliment. Looks like a smart guy. He looks smart, and according to his bio, he sounds smart. So let's get into it. If you're using GitHub Actions, there has been a lot happening this year in the security of GitHub repos, GitHub Actions, secrets in GitHub repos, which are largely used by GitHub Actions, but not always. And I'm here for all of it. I try to read all of this news. We don't need that. I try to make sure that I'm up to date. And this is kind of one of the latest happenings is there's a GitHub Action event that is being changed because it is exploitable in a way that's not very obvious, even if you know what this does, which most of us would never use this. This particular event is already dangerous enough, but one of its abilities is that it could be used on any branch, which we can talk about later on how exactly that exploits. But I care less about deep diving with you into every step of how these things are exploitable and more about making sure that in your default cases, there are certain settings you should just have set and you only change them when you need to change them, and that's rare. And unfortunately, these aren't the defaults that GitHub gives you. So we're going to go through a couple of sample repos that I have. We're going to talk about org settings, and we're going to start not in the GitHub action workflows themselves, because that can get detailed. I wouldn't teach that first, because those settings tend to be limited or controlled by your repo settings, and your repo settings tend to be enforced or controlled or limited by your org settings. So I feel like the first place we should go look is in org. And I have a free org. Of course, if you have an enterprise, if you're paying for Cloud Enterprise at GitHub, you've got even more settings where you can control the settings of multiple orgs all at once. But I have multiple organizations. I have one that's called Mostly DevOps. That particular organization is good examples of some of the GitOps things I do, and the GitHub actions and GitHub auto deploys. And that's in an org called Mostly DevOps. In other words, that organization kind of gets it. This one, however, is Hardly DevOps, which doesn't do a lot of things correctly. And so there's a lot of bad behaviors in here. We're not going to go necessarily through all the repos. But over in settings, I actually think these settings are default. I'd have to create a new organization to be sure of that. But I think in this one, we're going to go under General, under Actions. So on your settings for your repos, a lot of these settings are going to be the same as the repo settings. But when you set them at the org level, you can limit what repos can do. And we can go top down. I actually am more interested in going bottom up, but we're going to go top down for the sake of sanity. And the policies at the top for GitHub Actions is to allow anyone in any repo to run any action step, because action steps go into a workflow, and then you run workflows. And there's a bunch of different action steps. And those action steps can be just shell commands, or they can be your own code that you run that's sort of action compliant code. Or you can run someone else's action, of which there are now like 40,000 of them. And those actions can show up in the form of just TypeScript, or they can be a container. It just depends on the action, how they actually package and run the code. But those actions are all available in the marketplace, and you can control that here. That, I find, with the bigger the organization, the harder this is to lock down, because people different teams have different preferences. Some use a whole lot of third-party actions. Some use only maybe like a set of official actions, maybe from GitHub or their official vendors. Maybe they want to manually approve each action. And so it's tough to lock this down, I find, at the organizational level. You could say the most restrictive here really is you basically are creating an allow list, or a block list, but I think that's kind of crazy. Like anyone can create an action, so I don't see how a block list would do anything. A block list feels like a spam block filter. Like it's only going to be so effective. They're just going to create another action somewhere else. Like, if someone really wants to get in. So, I would say here, allow actions created by GitHub. Maybe I would say only allow actions by marketplace verified creators, of which like Docker and other tooling companies you would have heard of. They have their own verification process. They get the blue sticker, and we maybe they're maybe more trustworthy than random. So you could do that, but then you would have to then allow manually any other repo that has an action that you would run anywhere in your organization, and that seems pretty restrictive at the org level, because not a lot of people have permissions here. So I don't generally say that you set this. I would leave this at the default, and this isn't the setting that's being exploited right now anyway, really, because a lot of these actions that are being exploited are the ways that people are getting into your GitHub actions, of which we've had some, we're talking tens of thousands of people's accounts getting hacked in just the last month. There's a lot going on in this world of exploits, and it's getting pretty nasty, and we've got a lot to go through. So I'm going to go fast. I say that. It's not going to be fast. We're going to be here a while. You could do this pinning. Now, this pinning thing, really what it does is it enforces a good behavior. And that good behavior is that you're locking down GitHub Actions so that someone can't sneak in a change without you getting a PR to approve it. So tags, like in Docker, tags in GitHub Actions or on GitHub repos, Git tags are mutable, meaning they can change. So someone can make a new commit, give it the same version tag as a previous version, even though the commit has changed. They've moved the tag to that new commit. And that's a way that someone who's able to sneak in code to someone else's action can get that code run in your repo if you use that action. But you wouldn't even know there was a change because the tag is the same. And you generally want to at least pin to your tags. And what does that look like? Well, let's go into my new repo, which is a new, oh, by the way, hello, DevOps Compass. What's up? Good to see you here. And we've got Husky in the room. Hello, everybody. So in the silent rebuilds, it's just an example. I'm going to go into my workflows. And this one runs a renovate bot. A renovate bot is, let me zoom in a little bit. Renovate bot helps me keep all of my dependencies up to date. But you can see here, see this action? See how there's an @ symbol and a SHA hash there? That is pinning to the digest. And it even has the version number at the end. The way you can do this, and you should be doing this. At this point, I'm doing it on every repo from now on. I have to go back and I have dozens and dozens of repos that I need to go fix that have actions that aren't doing this. But the way you get this, there's two tools you need. You need a tool that gets you here, like gets you to SHA hash this thing. Or you're not gonna SHA hash. Sorry, it gets you to using the digest. It adds the digest, and then there's another tool that will keep them updated with the latest versions, and the versions would come through a pull request. So if there is, let's see, I want to make sure. I'm not sure if I can tell. This is going to be Docker files probably. Yeah, that's just Docker files. So let me go to my closed PRs and I'll show you what an update looks like. Okay. So whenever the renovate bot, which is the action I'm using to run renovate, whenever that updates, GitHub's dependabot will give me a PR for the new version and the new SHA hash of that action. Because I've pinned to the SHA hash, that helps ensure that there's no sneaky stuff is going on. There's no way that a hacker could go and find that renovate and sneak in an update without me getting a PR for it. And that PR would then allow me to see the release notes. And if I want to, I can go look at the source code. Of course, this means that you have to look at the changes in the source code between versions of each action. I know that's a big step. Some teams do that. If you're doing free stuff and it's just your own little hobby projects, I can see why you wouldn't read the source code of every GitHub action update. Just like you probably don't read the source code of every app update on all your apps. But at least you can look at the README and see, does this feel right? Does this look like a legitimate update? And you can see here it updates the version as well. So this is nice because the version here is just friendly for human use. Like the computer's not using this version, this tag. But at least I can recognize, okay, it's going from 43.0.17 all the way up to 44.05. That's a big jump. So I might be a little more disciplined in approving this PR. I might go and look at the release notes of it and see that, oh, wow, yeah, they've got a lot of changes. I can see all these different dependencies updated here. And I, probably can go click over there, look at the repo, kind of dig in because it seems like a lot has changed. And it's changed a major version for me, so I probably care more. And I can go and look in the commits, exactly the commits that are the differences there. It's nice, right? Like you get details here. So this is happening two things here. One, dependabot is changing the version of the GitHub action because I've pinned to either the version tag or a digest. If I just pinned to @main, which is a way to pin to a branch, then I would never get an update from Dependabot. It would never tell me to update my GitHub action because every time I ran my GitHub action, it would download the main branch of that repo and run whatever on it, which is not a good idea. I do not recommend you ever do that. Unless it's your code and you have your own internal strategy and you do branch-based releases, essentially, where you might consider your own GitHub action that you use internally, and you know you have a disciplined approach to PR reviews, and if you know how you doing all that, then you can go ahead and pin to the main branch in your version. But for everything that's external, every third-party tool you're using, you want to pin to a version. Now, how do you get here? What if you have an old GitHub action workflow and you need to add all the digests? Well, there's a tool for that. Well, there's multiple tools actually, but the one that I use is called the GH Pin Action. And this is a plugin that extends the GitHub CLI. So it adds a new step called, so have you ever used the GitHub Action CLI? You should totally be using it. GitHub CLI has abilities for you to see actions, to see the status of actions. You can do lots of cool stuff with GitHub. I mostly do it for cloning, but if you don't want to use Git, the GH CLI is there for you. So assuming you have that, you want to do GH Pin Actions once you've installed this. The nice thing is what this will do is it will take every action step that is a third-party step, and it'll take the tag that you've pinned to. It will go find the digest of that particular version and then give you a new GitHub action workflow YAML with all of those pins. So you don't have to manually go do this. Basically, I can fix a repo in one command or a couple of commands, because once I got the changes here, you have to tell it whether or not you want it to overwrite the files, and that would in turn become a PR. So if I have an old repo, which let's go find one. I hadn't picked one, so let's go look. Let's just look at a popular one I have. So this is a template for how to do advanced Docker builds. We're not going to get into how this repo works, but I know it has GitHub Actions. Now the question is in this GitHub Actions, do I pin all the steps to the digest? This is a big, complicated, reusable workflow. And I do have them pinned. So this one has already been updated. You can see each one of these steps I have pinned to a particular version. I'm not sure if I've pinned everything. Okay, this isn't the reusable. Yeah, so these were all done 2 weeks ago, so I've already updated these. So let's try to find a different repo that maybe hasn't changed. All right, so this is another template repo I have that shows off some generic GitHub Action repos. It shows some examples. All right, cool. These are not pinned. So you can see here I'm using someone's third party. Peter Evans is a pretty prolific GitHub Action creator. So he's got one here. There's a Slack API one here. This one is a set of commands. So this one really only has 2. So what we're going to do is to fix this one. I'm going to come over to my terminal. And we're just going to run that tool real quick. We're not going to do all the steps. I'm just going to run the tool so you can see how this fixes it pretty quickly for you. Okay, so I haven't downloaded this repo, so we have to download this repo. All right. So we're just going to clone this repo locally. And then inside here, if I go in the GitHub workflows directory, I have 6 different workflows. And if I use gh, let's see, what was the command there? GH pin actions. So pin actions, workflows, overwrite. That's what I've used before. Oh, I have to be in the root. Okay. So it's going to find all the workflows. Ooh. Okay, so it's please review the changes the following. Okay, so it's action or action with Shai are empty. Not sure about that error. But what is left is it's going through each file. It's finding any third-party actions that have a version pinned, and then it's pinning. It looks like here it's pinning to the latest version. So like in that case, V6 was the only thing I pinned to, but you always want to be pinning to the most specific version, in my opinion. Like you want to really control this stuff due to the nature and danger of open source GitHub actions nowadays. As multiple actions have been compromised, a whole bunch of them. I'm thinking at this point, 1,000 maybe actions have been attacked this year successfully. So we want to really lock this down. So we want to get this down to the very specific version and to the actual commit hash of that version. So that's what this is. And you can see I would just create a new PR, and it shouldn't really change anything because all it's doing is pinning to the latest version. So it's technically just pinning to the version I've already been running. So there's really not a huge risk, because if I had a more specific pin on this line right here, then it would stick to that particular one. So this is really convenient. And because I don't mind running this tool, I didn't like study and analyze the source code of this tool because it doesn't have any control of my GitHub. It's really just making text changes on my local machine. So I'm okay with it running on my local machine. And then, so that would be how you would migrate. And once you're there, make sure you have Dependabot, which I will throw in this silent rebuild repo, in case you haven't looked at this. This is a repo where I've got videos and a blog post, which I'm not sure I've updated. I need to update this README. I've got a new blog post all about silent rebuilds, which is a different problem that relates to images. But as a part of this repo, I created some related stuff around actions. So you can see, for example, my Dependabot config for how I do daily GitHub action checks for new versions, right? That's what this does right here, is every day GitHub actions will run in the background. It'll run Dependabot against all my GitHub actions workflows and make sure, and it looks for any new digest to pin to, any new version of any of the third-party actions I'm using. So I do this in every repo. So the combination of migrating to the digest and then making sure that this is in place is going to keep you safe in terms of accidentally running action code that you haven't already approved. That's all this does. If you've approved that version to run, then your repo is going to run whatever code is from that third-party repo. But because you're depending on this digest now, you can be certain that the code won't change, because you can't really effectively fake that Shai digest. All right? Yeah, I know there's theoretical collisions and all that, but it's not going to happen in the real world. All right. What is next? We have only gone through one step. Not all these steps are that complicated, but that step is... Oh, didn't mean to do that. Don't need to combine those. Unload tab. I'm not sure. I don't know what that meant. All right. I want these to not be tabs anymore. I'm in the Zen browser. They keep changing a little bit. There used to be a split tabs. But now that's not there. All right. So we're going to get rid of this one. Okay. So these are the permissions in our org. And by me doing that, I'm going to force everybody else in their repos to pin. So I'm not going to enforce this in the org until I've already worked with all the teams. This goes for every setting we're going to change. Don't be the enemy of your teams. Don't be someone who goes through wreck and shop and checking all these things and locking it all down, because you're going to break people's stuff. You're going to break people's workflows. So I would go to the teams. I would probably go repo by repo, first migrating them to the pins, getting everyone used to Dependabot, updating these, and then I would then go in org wide. Once I felt like everybody was good, everybody wasn't going to break, and I would enforce this for all future workflows and future repos. So that's a good thing. I'm not going to check it here because this is my bad org. This is the org that this is not, by the way, these are I'm pretty sure the defaults. So we don't care so much about runners right now. We could argue that, you need to lock down runners or control runners, but I'm not going to talk so much about runner security, because running your own runners, complicated, lots of security concerns. This is more about what do you get out of the box for free, right? Let's lock down the free stuff. Let's lock down the default settings we all have. Artifact and log retention doesn't really matter, but longer the better in general for security. But you may have limitations there. I care more about settings like this: approval for running fork pull request workflows from contributors. Okay. On GitHub, if you make an open source repo, if you make just a public repo, you want to change this setting every single time. This setting, I don't know why this default is still the default. It is set for ease of use, not for proper 2025 security, in my opinion. The default should be this. And what this setting does is even if you have a private repo, this can be a risky thing to not change if you leave it at the default. I don't know when you would ever want this to be selected. This shouldn't even be an option, but it's probably there for historical purposes. But that is insane that option even exists. We want this. When we have a repo, anyone can fork it. A fork is just a copy. Essentially, it's a clone that someone's re-uploaded to GitHub. It's called a fork. And that fork has no real permissions in theory to your prime upstream repo. So if someone forks your code, you would think they don't have any ability to do anything to your repo. Just because they forked it, great, they made a copy. But that's not always true. And that's part of where we're getting into trouble on GitHub, is that some of these settings combined with other settings means that people that don't have permissions in your repo might actually get to run code that you didn't approve. And that's the real risk here. That's how S1ngularity happened. That's how some of the Shai Hulud is happening, or Shai Hulud, but it's called Shai Hulud. Dune reference, and a great name. Every good hack has to have a great name. So those both have great names. But in this case, what we're saying is anytime someone hasn't been manually added to the permissions of my repo, and if we just go and look at this, let's go look at the contributor settings of this repo, right? Actually, this is not a repo. Let's go to an actual repo. If I go in here and I go to collaborators, please hold. Okay. Collaborators is where you should be managing permissions. You have org permissions. You have repo permissions. You have the owner's file. These are all different levels of permissions you should be setting. You should be controlling your repo permissions from here. The problem with this setting is that this kind of, in my opinion, provides a backdoor to permissions that shouldn't exist. It makes sense that it needs to be here, but the ramifications are so far and wide that it's not properly elevated to the place it needs to be, which would be in the collaborator area. So the default setting here means that if someone wants to help you with your repo and they fork it and then they make some changes and they give you a PR, aren't they a nice person? Pull requests accepted, right? So then you approve their pull request because they gave you a new feature. Great. If you have this setting at the default, this means that the first time they ask to give you the pull request, which they don't need permission to give you a pull request on an open source repo, the default permissions are that anyone can give you a pull request because they're not changing your code. They're just giving you essentially a GitHub issue. It's a special kind of GitHub issue, but it's an issue that says, would you take a look at my code and my repo, and if you so like it, you shall have it. You can bring in the changes I recommend, but they're over here in my repo for now because I don't have permissions to your repo, right? That's what approval of a first-time contributor looks like. Is you don't know that, you may not even know this person, and they just gave you a pull request for code that you can bring in from their fork. You can look at the changes. You can decide whether or not you want to have it. But the first time, no GitHub actions are run, which is what should always be the case. Like, I don't know this person. They're not a trusted insider, because if they were the trusted insider, I would add them to collaborators. I would add them to a security group. Maybe they're a member of my organization. We have groups and permissions for that elsewhere. Here, this is more for convenience. What it does is it doesn't mean that they approve the PR or they have control in my source code. All it means is that they can submit a PR and require approval before GitHub actions are run. Once I've approved that one time, this setting becomes basically, they always get permission to run GitHub actions with any PR they will ever give me for the future of time into Foreverland. That is a pretty extreme setting, because what we've seen over the last few years, particularly this year, is hackers playing the long game in open source. And they will be nice for years potentially. And then someday they decide that now that they've got a little bit of insider access, they now are going to go bad. They're going to turn into their evil form and submit you some sneaky PRs that automatically get run in GitHub Actions. Now, if you've given someone a maintainer access, like added them to contributors or the owner's file, you're not really going to be protecting from that, right? You've already given them inside write access to the repo. They're going to do what they want to do. So that's the thing that you always, you got to be very careful about. But in this case, this isn't a permission that shows up necessarily in other permissions places. It's not super obvious that this is here. So I say every repo needs it this way. Require approval for all external contributors every time they submit a pull request for their GitHub Actions to run. Because if GitHub Actions auto run, what that really means is if someone wants to be bad, they just get nice for a minute. In this setting, they would just be nice, and I approve their first pull request, and then they can, at any moment in time in the future, now submit another pull request with bad code. Maybe it's a changed GitHub action, and that GitHub action is designed to extract my secrets from my repo. And this is exactly how S1ngularity worked. The S1ngularity attack was using maybe something like this to be nice, and then later on, it's going to pull anything that the GitHub token in GitHub Actions has access to. Obviously, it can copy the source code out, but it could maybe make other PRs on behalf of GitHub, which is a setting you'll see down here. allow GitHub Actions to create and approve pull requests, which is often very necessary in a repo. But up here, that setting, the problem is it's not clear to me who has been given approval, what accounts have been approved. Maybe I've had a repo like my most popular repo from my Docker course. It's got dozens of people that I've approved a PR from. I don't know these people. They maybe fixed one line in a README, and they helped. So I approved the PR. But it doesn't mean in the future I want them to suddenly be able to create new PRs and have that auto run any GitHub action change they made. That's scary, right? Because that's essentially running code that I didn't allow to run against my stuff. Now, this setting right here is default. So you're going to set this, you can set this at the org level. And I'm betting the only thing that you'll break is that people that have not been given permissions inside collaborators for your repo or your organization will just need their pull requests approved to run the GitHub Actions. And the way that works is when you look, let me see if I can find one. If you look at, like, if you have a pull request and it's from someone not you, someone outside your organization, when you come down here, it'll just have a button that says approve to run GitHub Actions. Doesn't mean approve the PR. It just means approve that the automation with access to other things can run for this PR. And so you could simply look at the changes and go, yeah, those changes aren't screwing around with GitHub Actions. They're not trying to run anything nefarious. So I will approve GitHub Actions to run. It's a manual step for maintainers, but a necessary one, I think, for all repos, not just GitHub Actions, not just open source ones, but even closed source ones. I think that's necessary. Okay, on to the next setting. And Anton is here. What's up? Long live the fighters. Nice. All right. Fork pull request workflows in private and internal repositories. These settings apply to private and internal repositories. Repository administrators will only be able to change this setting that are enabled here. Run workflows from fork pull request. This tells actions to run workflows from pull requests originating from repository forks. Note that doing so will give maintainers of those forks the ability to use tokens with read permissions on the source repository. And it's got once I enable it, it's got send write tokens to workflows. So again, this one is very scary because if you have an open source repo, you can't control who forks it and what anyone else does with it. So you really don't want to enable this. I think these are the kind of settings where this one is safe by default, and it should be this way until you exactly know why your organization needs to turn it on. I think that the default there is safe. The final two here are also something that's changed in the last 3 years, something I'm going to talk about for a few minutes. And it's going to be semi-related to this one right here. Not necessarily. But today's sponsor is my course members. Let's call them members. I have no official sponsor, so this sponsor segment is me talking about what I'm releasing. So if you didn't know, you can go to learn.bretfisher.com, and I am working on a couple of GitHub Action courses. You can go here and sign up for any updates to those courses. I was actually working on a update email this week on the status of the first course. This is going to be a series of focused courses solving very specific problems. Imagine that you have a bespoke, custom Bret series of videos that include assignments and quizzes. Imagine that you have that around what you might ask ChatGPT. Maybe you went to ask ChatGPT, hey, I need to implement GitHub Actions security to make sure all my repos are properly locked down and are not going to be attacked, especially the open source ones. ChatGPT might give you some opinions. I'm going to give you a course that's very purpose built for that question and answer. with examples and demos and assignments, more than what ChatGPT would give you. So gone are the 20-hour courses. I'm probably not going to make, I don't know when I'm going to next make a 20-hour course, or really even a 10-hour course. It's going to be a series of small courses solving very specific problems that are complicated, that are nuanced, and I have opinions and experience about that not maybe everyone else out there has, because they haven't been dedicated to using, teaching GitHub Actions for years now. So that's my ad. So yeah, sign up over there. Okay, let's get back to it. We're on the workflow permissions. My tasty tea. All right. The default setting until 2023 was this. And what that meant is any workflow you create in a repo, now these are org settings, so I could set this org wide, but that's the same setting inside a repo. And read and write was particularly dangerous because it meant the default permissions, which you don't even have to specify in a workflow, also something I disagree with. The default permissions, if you don't set any in a workflow, would be read, write everything, including accessing secrets, including committing source code to the repo, including changing other settings inside the repo, and deploying, creating deployments, and creating all sorts of bad behavior when you maybe only have a workflow that needs to lint, which means it doesn't even need but like one setting, which is read to content. That's all it needs to do that workflow. But instead, this one's giving it over a dozen read and write permissions. And if you're curious about the permissions, there's a growing list of them. And they have a decent list. Yes. And these permissions give the GitHub token environment variable, they give it more permissions or less permissions based on the settings inside the workflow. So our goal is we want least privilege. I imagine you've probably heard of that term. Least privilege means we get no permissions by default. We want that approach because the alternative is willy-nilly permissions. It's everything gets read writes and we maybe have to lock down some. But the reality is most of your workflows don't need that much permissions. They have very specific purposes. Usually people don't create mega workflows with dozens of permission needs. They all just do one or two little things. Maybe they build a Docker image and then they push it to GitHub Container Registry. So they would need write to packages is what that's called. That's a permission in here. Packages. So I would give it write access so it could upload to the GitHub Container Registry. And then it would need read access to the contents. And the contents is the Git clone of that repo, which you can deny. But you don't have to. Not every workflow I run needs access to that repo's content. Sometimes it's a workflow that just goes and checks other things on the internet. It can do whatever I want it to do. It's an action. It can just run arbitrary code. So you don't necessarily even need access to the Git repo's contents in a workflow, so why give it unless you need it? So those would be just two permissions out of the more than dozen here, right? So really what I prefer is I want this to be none. I want to make this say you have to specify every permission you need in every workflow. It's just good behavior. I'm going to show you in a minute how we can actually lint for that and make sure that we always apply it. But if I do this here, at least it gives them read repository contents and package permissions. Workflows have read permissions and repository the contents and package scopes only. So at least it's only now giving me 2 permissions of the dozen plus. And it's only giving me read. So it's not going to give me complete access to all my secrets. It's not going to get me permission to create checks or deploy to a GitHub deployment or to create new pull requests necessarily. So that's good. I mean, it's at least something. So I would always enforce this. Now, again, if you're in an org, be careful, because as soon as you change this, you're going to break a lot of other people's repos in your org. So I would go repo by repo, working with the teams to change this setting, because it's going to force them to go into, let's go into this GitHub Action Template one. It's going to force them to come into each workflow. I see your question, Anton. One second. And I'm going to have to give each one permissions. So look at that. This one is crazy. It says write all. I do not think it needs write all. That is a bad one. I definitely don't need write all. I was clearly lazy on this one. Shame on me. I need to fix it. So I'm glad I picked this repo, because this is an old one. It's probably 4+ years old. So I need to change those permissions. And nowadays, really, the permissions are per job. We really should be setting them per job. There's a linter that I've become a fan of. Let's see if I can find it. Maybe I have a different browser. 1 second. Zigmore. So this is a tool that I've become a fan of. I personally use SuperLinter, but if you want to lint your workflows, Zizmore. I'm not sure how to say it. But this static analysis tool is pretty good. One of the things it's going to complain about is that, no, you should put permissions at every level and be very detailed and very explicit about your permissions. And it's not a ton of work. This is stuff that you tend to do one time when you create the workflow. You know if the permissions are too low, because the workflow won't run, or it'll give you an error. And then you go look at the error and you realize that you maybe need permissions to a new GitHub API. And so you go add a new permission and then you try it again. That is something I do with every new workflow I create, is I have to troubleshoot the permissions. I'm not really sure on the onset, because a lot of action creators including GitHub, are bad at telling you what permissions that action step needs in your repo to run. And shame on them if they don't add permissions. I think that's like, if you're going to use somebody else's action, or if you're going to be someone who creates a GitHub action for others to use, you better tell me in the README the minimum permissions that needs to work, so that I don't have to figure it out myself. I often will make a complaint or suggest a PR to them if I'm using it and they don't have their own permissions set, because I don't want to have to redo the work every time of figuring it out. So this tool will go and scan and tell me which workflows need to lock down the security permissions. It does a lot more than that. It's really good at helping me find potential problems with strings or environment variable escapes and stuff like that, bad behaviors that I don't want. So it's constantly telling me I suck. Yeah. So we don't want that permission. That's the point there. But you're going to have to set those permissions at the job level and the workflow level once you've set this, because it'll break a lot of your repos. It'll break the workflows. And then this one, you almost always are going to have to check allow GitHub Actions to create and approve pull request. You maybe would do this since this is an on feature, by having this off at the org level, it doesn't enforce off. I wish you could do that. Like, I wish it had the ability for you to enforce off versus on, but this one I tend to find very repo specific, but the repos that need it, need it. A lot of my repos have this turned on, because I need the actions to do smart things and automate my GitHub, which means they need to be able to create pull requests like a digest change. That's creating a pull request. So I tend to turn this on in most of my repos. All right, taking a break. Anton, what's your question? What do you think about binding actions use these statements to a specific commit instead of just a version? Is it a good practice? So Anton, you missed that whole talk was at the beginning of this stream. Yes. And you can, the short answer is yes, you should always do that. I am showing examples of doing that somewhere in one of my repos. But you clearly know what you're talking about because you know that exists. I only do it that way now. And the way I migrate is using this tool. It's a GitHub extension for the CLI that I run locally. I'll put this back up there. I run this locally to give me the diff. Let me show you what it looks like. This is what that tool did. I ran the tool. It goes through all my GitHub actions in a repo that I've cloned down. And it changes all of my pens from version to digest and then includes the version number in the comment. So I need this tool to migrate my repos, and then I need Dependabot to keep them current, right? Because you've got to get your actions updated. So that would be an example I have over here. So in this repo and many other repos, I have an example of what the Dependabot config looks like for that. So it's just these lines here that makes sure that daily it checks for new versions of GitHub Actions. And, you know, in most teams, you probably wouldn't do daily here. You might do weekly. But, and, you know, now that I think about it, I might in the future change this so that, assuming everyone's respecting Symver, that it does a daily check for patch level, because that would presumably be where security updates would happen. And then it would do it again for monthly and that's, if you see this down here, this is what this one does. This one down here, I don't do major upgrades of Dockerfile pinning from images, my base images. I don't want it to update to major versions automatically. I don't want it to give me PRs for major version updates. I control that, right? So you can do this same thing, I believe, up here. And then I could technically end up with two policies, I think, for GitHub Actions. One for security updates, patch levels, and any major minor updates. Again, not everybody follows semantic versioning properly in their GitHub Actions, but if they do, the reason I'm suggesting that is because if you've got lots of repos, this can create lots of churn. You'll get lots of daily PRs, especially if you live in NPM and JavaScript land. You get lots of actions that update often if you use a lot of that kind of stuff in that ecosystem. If you use a lot of third-party tools. And then, you know, if you have 50 repos, you know, it sucks because you're going to get one PR per repo and you have to approve them all. There's a lot of toil there. So yes, I like it. I recommend it. All right. So now we're going to move on from repository settings to workflow settings. And there's two main areas that we need to focus on. One we kind of already covered is adding those permissions to each workflow at the workflow level and then at the job level. So if we go here, let's just go to the code of this repo. And this is something called Digestabot. So this is a very small workflow. But the permissions are set at the job level, not the workflow level. I used to set them at the workflow level when I only had one job. But that tool I was just referring you to, the Zizmore analysis tool, essentially this is a linter. And this linter will complain and say, no, you should put it in the job level. And so because that tool keeps enforcing it on me, I now have a different opinion. And that is, yeah, maybe I do want to put it in the job level. That way, if someone ever adds another job, they don't have to move their permissions to the job because, you know, each job will then probably end up with different permissions. And so in this one, I'm giving it contents right, pull request right, and then ID token, which is just a part of the pull request part that this tool needs, I think. So it's just a single step, and that's permissions. once you've set your repos to read only by default in permissions, you will then need to come in here and manually add permissions. I have luckily been doing that ever since I started using GitHub Actions. Like 6 years ago, when I started using GitHub Actions, I learned about permissions. And then as soon as I learned about it, I was like, oh, I want this on every time. You can technically set this to permissions : none, which would mean it has access to nothing. And if you had a workflow and its only job was to ping something or to like curl something from the internet and then output it into the logs, like something that doesn't need anything in the repo other than the fact that it's just a running workflow. And there are things like that I have used. Then you would need no permissions inside the repo. You wouldn't even need the contents, right? Because in theory, if the command was just a step and it was just a specific command or curl or a ping, then you don't really need the contents of the repo. So you wouldn't even need contents read. So you could set technically permissions none. I do that when in those rare cases, but it is possible. So you notice here that, by the way, write automatically assumes read. So you're getting read access to all that stuff. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to do individual secret level permissions. So I can't say like, give it access to this secret, but not these other secrets. I really wish we had that. This would get more complicated. I do agree that this would be complicated, but if it somehow at least allowed me to limit the scope. We're going to talk about maybe using GitHub deployments as a way to limit scope of those permissions in a minute. But other than the permissions, the one other thing you need to protect yourself from that has been the cause of the S1ngularity attack, which successfully hacked the NX repo and then the NX npm library, and that was in September, August. It was not a very nice thing. It went wide and far because it was a very popular npm package. But the way they were able to get there and get into npm, and that's the same thing that's happening with Shai Hulud, is that they're exploiting a couple of those settings. If you don't have those settings locked down and you give the default setting of old repos is read and write to all things. And they'll do that, but then they will look for any workflows that's what this on means, is that this is a workflow permission. Sorry, this is a workflow event. I wish this just said events instead of on, but on means it's going to watch for events. And that's how a GitHub action runs. If you don't have anything here, I think you have to have something at least, because it would never run, and you never could run it, even programmatically, you couldn't run it. So there's a list of these. And here's a list. This is a very large list on the right. All these things that can trigger workflows to run. And they're all, I mean, the ones you really like, pull request and push, or let's see, what are the most popular ones? Pull request for me by far is the most common. A push is often used, so push to any branch, not just to a pull request branch, but pull request means create a pull request, push to a pull request, push to a new commit in the pull request. That's all under the pull request event. But you've got other ones that are sort of self-descriptive around an issue comment. If someone adds an issue comment, run this workflow rather. But the one that you really, really need to watch out for and never use unless you really, really know why you need it is the pull request target. And this was one of the ways the NX repo was exploited. And this is also one of the things that GitHub is changing. They are now going to reduce the damage potential of the pull request target. And the gist here is pull request event, which is what we all normally use. The pull request event is very normal, used every day. Lots of workflows, lots of repos use it. So That's when I build images. That's when I run tests. That's when I lint, all on the pull request event. But that runs inside of my repo, right? With only my source code and only pull requests that I approve to run workflows. Remember, we changed that setting. We changed the setting in the administrator settings of the repo or the org so that it would not automatically run PRs from other non-contributors if they were in a fork and gave me back a pull request. I wouldn't want to auto-run their GitHub actions. So I don't have that set to auto-run. But that's all done with the pull request. But if you add the -target on the end, that gives your pull request event a little bit more permissions. And it allows, one of the things it can do is it allows those forks to run as if they're running in your repo with your secrets, which is a big no-no generally, usually, and especially in open source, you really don't want to ever use this because you don't want to have any potential or even accidental potential for someone to take and change, fork your stuff, change it to be bad, and then give you a pull request and then extract out your secrets, which is basically what all these are doing. They're extracting the secrets of your GitHub repos. And that's usually your deployment secrets, your NPM publishing secrets, all the, your production server secrets, maybe your CI secrets that tend to be like the most permissions of anything in your environments. So you never really want this to happen. You never really want to see that anywhere. And if you could just take that, do a grep of all source code you have on your machine and just look for that string. Because if you have it anywhere, it's dangerous. You probably don't need to use it, and you probably don't realize why you're even needing to use it. And that's what's happened, is a lot of people thought they needed it, so they added it as an event. It doesn't need to be used. But the part that they are changing to limit the blast radius, and this is what happened to the sad repo of NX, and they were unfortunately attacked in this way, is that the pull request, the attacker created a pull request against an old branch that was still using pull request target. So their pull request target wasn't like the main branch. It wasn't the release branch, which is what normally what pull requests do. They pull requested to a old branch that wasn't as secure and as safe as the newer modern branches. And if you think about it, on a very large team, let's say you've got dozens, if not hundreds of people in your repo, and they have many, many branches, and you've probably got multiple release branches at that point because you're a very complex monolith where you've got old versions you're still supporting and new versions. So you've got different release branches and different epics all happening at the same time. And so you maybe have hundreds of active branches. And who knows whether you've got some old branch sitting around from an old release from 3 years ago, which has less secure workflows in it still. So they make a pull request to a branch that still is using pull request target. They can now run code in that branch on your repo on your behalf with essentially your repo's GitHub token, and then pull out the secrets and exfiltrate those to somewhere else on the internet or to GitHub, which is what's happening with the Shai Hulud. With the Shai Hulud attacks, they're causing it. If you get this particular NPM and you download the NPM to your machine, it extracts all your local secrets and then puts them in a new repo that it creates in your own GitHub. So there was, at some point, there was like 8,000 or 10,000 repos of people's secrets sitting in their own GitHub organization last month. Like, it was insane. I mean, there was new people every hour getting attacked. And that was all through NPM and downloading NPM. But the way that all happened was because the attacker used these methods in GitHub Actions to pull out the secrets for NPM and then use those to go and update NPM packages in the background silently. So it's kind of a two-pronged attack. They go for your secrets through GitHub Actions, and then they use those secrets against you wherever those secrets might lead them, which is quite often for NPM people. It's an NPM attack. Can I offer the Maven GitHub course recordings? That one seemed to be awesome. Sorry, I missed it. That's a good question. I will have to take a look at those. I still have the recordings, but at this point they're 2 to 3 years old. And I'm pretty sure the GitHub ones haven't changed, but the Argo CD ones, they've had a major version of Argo CD released since then. So I don't know that they're current, but that's a great question. Reach out to me in Discord, like DM me there or on Blue Sky, or email me at brett@bretfisher.com. Reach out to me somewhere else, and I will think about what that means. I'd hate to give you outdated stuff that I'm planning on replacing anyway. These GitHub Action courses that I'm creating will supersede that content. So depending on whether you're GitHub Actions or Argo, like maybe you want both for that course. The course that we're talking about is, let's see, it was Bret.courses. I think it was this one. Yeah. So this course, automating your deployments in Kubernetes with GitHub Actions and Argo CD, essentially. I'm just realizing this is a little bright on my screen. There we go. Not so much reflection. But yeah, that I haven't run that course in a couple of years because I've been turning it slowly, I admit, turning it into on-demand courses. And but yeah, reach out to me somewhere else where we can have a conversation, because I would be happy if you think they'd be useful. But I'd hate for them to be outdated and you get wrong information. So let's figure it out, and I'd love to help. All right. And I'm sorry you missed it. So let's go back to the events. So basically that's the one event, the pull request target, that you want to avoid and go looking for and actively go do a search through all your repos. Let me see if I can actually, I don't even think I have an example of using it. If I were to go to just search all my repos. Yeah, that's not going to work. Ooh, look at this. Oh, this is a fork. I forked a NeoVim repo. Oh, that's interesting. What is this? Why do I have 10 pull requests that say they have pull request target? Ooh, these are old. Or they're done. I trust the source code more. So this is a repo that I forked. And this is basically a quick way to get started with NeoVim. And I recommend it. It's called Kickstart. And check Lua formatting. So yeah. So the problem with this one, they don't need this. And this is a security risk. What I'd be curious about is if I go to this repos today, do they still use it? Yeah. Yeah, they still use it. So I think all they need here is pull request. I don't see any reason why they need target. All this is doing is checking out the code that someone submitted to a PR and then running a third-party linter against it. And there's no reason why that needs special permissions. So this one right here is a security risk, in my opinion. And I'm going to go see if anyone has noticed. Let's see. I'm actually going to take out the rest of this. Improve GitHub workflow. This was merged. This improves the GitHub workflow to no longer require manual approvals for PRs from first-time contributors. Changes the GitHub event from pull request target and adds an explicit PR head checkout. Right. The problem is what they've now created is an easier way for someone to try exploit this repo. So now what I can do is like this is more convenient, but now someone can make a change to this GitHub action, submit a PR, and they can put whatever code they want in here and it will auto run. And it'll auto run in the repo itself with the repo's permissions and GitHub token. So I'm pretty sure that's the exposure that they've now just given themselves. Let me see if I can find the exact verbiage here. So as of the 8th, so that was 3 days ago. So this now, they've tried to stop a little bit of the damage here. So now in effect, if you use the pull request target, it always uses the default branch for workflow source and reference. So the workflow file and checkout commit will always be taken from the repository's default branch, regardless of the pull request base branch. This prevents outdated and potentially vulnerable workflows on other branches within the repository from being executed in these events. GitHub ref will resolve the default branch, and the Shai will point to latest commit. Right. Here's the warning. While this change helps the remediation of vulnerabilities in pull request target workflows in a repository, it is important to note that the use of pull request target events in combination with pull requests from forks has an increased risk. Pull request target events execute based on user-supplied pull requests, which can come from external forks, and are executed with access to action secrets. Given the attack surface, care should be taken to avoid action workflow vulnerabilities and to ensure untrusted code or input is not being used in a way that could influence execution. GitHub code scanning with CodeQL can be used to identify vulnerabilities in action workflows and is free for all public repositories. Another change in the environment branch protect. So again, I just hope this repo doesn't have any secrets because anyone right now can take advantage of it. And this is true for any repo on GitHub that has been using the GitHub. By the way, this has to be used in combination. I think this has to be used in combination with that repo setting that allows auto running of workflows for first-time contributors. So hopefully they haven't gone in and changed that setting because then that would be even more dangerous. Okay, it says here, another change that is that environment branch protection, environment rules for pull request events evaluate against the executing reference to prevent, it's hard to understand what the hell that sentence even means. To prevent unintended access to environment secrets during pull request workflows, environment branch protection rules will evaluate against the execution reference, not the pull request head. Okay, what this means is, and this is going to be one of my mitigation techniques for you, if you are looking for more ways to lock this stuff down, especially if you're like me and you have some open source repos that happen to deploy to environments. And when I do that, it's typically like a website or something where I just need to update HTML or whatever in a website. It's maybe a markdown or some other static site generator. And I have created a GitHub environment. Now, GitHub environments people have a lot of opinions about them. They're not the most fleshed out feature, but environments at least can protect you in some cases. And the way that I've been testing this, and I don't really have an opinion that I can state, what I want to be able to say is that if you were to put all of your important secrets, or just all your secrets in a repo into environments, and that even if you technically don't have like a production environment or a staging environment that you're deploying to, but that you treat environments like special things, then and the way that you use an environment, if you don't know, is you go into let me just look at this one. Where's my silent rebuild? Okay. So if I go into the silent rebuild repo and I go into settings, if I go in and, and I might have action secrets. Oops, that's the wrong one. Let me go to secrets and variables. So I might have secrets here. Most people just create repo secrets, especially if they're like things to, access test databases that you've got running somewhere else, or npm publish keys, like keys to your other systems. You might just create them as repository secrets and then create workflows around those. A more secure way to do this is, in order to protect yourselves from rogue actors showing up with pull requests that try to leak your secrets, what you can do is add all the secrets to an environment. So I might just call this environment staging, whatever. And then I'm going to add my secrets to that. Now, when you're in a workflow, if you want a workflow to target an environment, because that's a thing in a workflow, you have to add a line to the job that says, this is targeting this environment, so please load me the secrets and variables from that environment. All right. And in order for that workflow to run, it, in a lot of cases, would then need a manual approval, because typically environments are something that you want to control more, so you can put more guardrails on when those run. And so if you go up here to rules, you can create a rule that says, in this one, I want to, let's see, restrict updates. I'm always forgetting. Require a pull request. I would do that. Nope, that's not it. Oh, I didn't practice this part. It was something Require status checks to pass. That is something we want, but that means they have to run. Now I don't remember how to do it. I might have to ask ChatGPT. So the goal here is I'm going to make an environment rule that basically prevents my actions from running when they're trying to run on a particular environment. And then it gives me a guardrail around the secrets that they're only available in that environment. So that means I could technically run linters and things that aren't specifying an environment. And there's no secrets available because the secrets would only be available if I use it on an environment. And so the setting what this little thing right here is telling me, to prevent unintended access to environments, to prevent unintended access to environment secrets during pull request workflows, environment branch protection rules will evaluate against the execution reference, which means if a bad person is still trying to get your secrets and they're targeting you and they realize that they can't get the secrets just through editing a workflow because the secrets are only in the environment, they could try to add a line for the environment to their PR, right? I mean, then they would have access to all those environment secrets. But this won't let them add or change the environment specified for the job. It will always look to what they're trying to change to see if that was ever specified before, not what they've changed. So it prevents the attacker. It basically removes the ability for them to even use environments or access environments unless they were already specified in the workflow. Now, if you already have workflows in your repo that are specifying the environments with all your secrets in it, they could try to change one of those. And then it says for pull request review, and pull request review comment, environment rules evaluate against the merge. This matches the merge commit context those events use during execution. Not sure exactly how that. This one's not related to pull request target. But for pull request target, environment rules evaluate against the default branch. This is consistent with the updated GitHub ref and ensures policies against. Okay, so it's always going to make sure that the environment is allowed per your default branch before it ever tries to run that that workflow. All right, so this is the stuff that has protected us from the Shai Hulud attacks. If we did all of this, it would protect us from Shai Hulud, it would protect us from S1ngularity. If you simply lock down the settings in the repo and then add manual permissions to each one of your workflows, you're good. You can't really be taken advantage of. And assuming you're not using pull request target. But even if you are using pull request target, if you do the secrets and environment thing, you might be okay in a public repo. But if you lock down forks and you lock down read only by default, then you're doing pretty good there. The next big attack we've been seeing, this is like a subject change really. The next latest attack that the headlines have been spreading around. See if I can find it. Let's see. I thought I had all this. 1 second while I... All right, this. Found it. Prompt pwn. Now, a completely different attack vector is using AI. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. All right, but you should be concerned about GitHub actions that are public or private, but particularly if they're public, and they're using any form of AI in GitHub actions. We've already seen attacks this year, successful attacks in terms of proof of concept. I'm not sure how wild they were at the time, but people were showing how easy it was to use GitHub's MCP server to accidentally cause your AI, either through someone else's intentional means or through your own accidental means. The MCP tends to have access to all your repos, private and public. And so if someone submits, let's say they submit a GitHub issue to one of your public repos, and in that GitHub issue, they do a jailbreak of the prompt, where we've all probably heard about this for years, to be able to, convince the AI to do something that it's not intended to do. And they can put in a GitHub action, they can put it in a GitHub issue, or they can put it in a GitHub PR. It might as well just put it in an issue because it's easy, and that's the easiest level of effort. And if you have a GitHub action that looks at that issue and it's using AI, they might be able to convince your GitHub action to do things it shouldn't, to tell the AI to do things it shouldn't. And the first way we saw this happening was simply by, if I was using GitHub MCP, the endpoint, and I was running my AI, maybe it was ChatGPT, or I was using Claude Code locally, and I had MCP server to GitHub MCP, and I say, hey, AI, please look at the top most recent 20 issues across all my repos, and please triage them and tell me which ones we should focus on first. So it's going to go to the MCP API, it's going to iterate through all my repos, and it's going to scan all those issues. But if one of those issues tries to jailbreak the AI, because, how do I know? They're just a bunch of public issues. I didn't ask for it to, I didn't go vet each one of those issues before I asked it to look at them. So it's reading all that content. And if one of those is trying to jailbreak, it's going to jailbreak out of my AI. And there were successful laboratory attacks where they convinced the AI to go pull secrets from your other repos, or pull the content, the Git clone of other repos that are private that you have access to, that the AI has access to, because it's got access to everything in your GitHub. And then do stuff with that. Like, take a copy and put it somewhere else on the internet, whatever. And that was like a 6-month-old attack in theory. I don't know how successful that was. But we're seeing more sophistication now, because you don't even need necessarily MCP involved. You just need to have GitHub actions that are already using some AI step, of which GitHub has many now. You can put any AI into GitHub and have it run on actions. And it makes sense. Like, why wouldn't we have an AI that, triages each issue as it comes in, and evaluates each PR, and auto labels things and auto prioritizes them and puts them in my GitHub projects based on what type of work it is. Like, those all make sense. But the problem is, we're giving AI permissions to do things. We're giving it write access to things because it needs to make decisions and go do stuff. It needs to add a comment, or it needs to create a PR, or it needs to add something to a project, or it needs to upvote, downvote, or close or stay open, whatever. It's going to have permissions to do stuff. And it's just going to read all that text that's in the issue or in the pull request. And if that text is successfully able to jailbreak out and convince the AI of different tasking that it needs to take on, well, then they can completely control your AI and can do whatever they want with it, right? And that's what prompt pwn is basically showing, is any AI in a GitHub action is potentially suspect to being jailbroken and exploited for it to do whatever that AI has permissions to do. And a lot of these, they're not read-only. The AI prompts are to write something, to make a pull request, to write a commit, to change a security setting or something on your GitHub. So the problem is the AIs aren't sandboxed well, and anyone in theory could give prompt to this AI. And they could sit there and just try all day long. They can make issues all day long. Now, GitHub, in theory, in the background, could be watching for bad behavior, but they have to do this across github.com. So I have not ever seen anything where they lock down accounts before the first few repos are attacked. So let me read through key takeaways here. Aikido, good job to them. By the way, I've been talking with them on the S1ngularity and other attacks. They're a great team, and I've been talking with them about their tooling. They have some tools that help with this, particularly with NPM. But Aikido Security discovered a new class of vulnerabilities, which have been named prompt pwn, in GitHub Actions or GitLab CI/CD pipelines when combined with AI agents like Gemini, Claude Code, OpenAI Codex, GitHub's AI inference in CI/CD pipelines. Basically, any way you can prompt in a CI/CD pipeline is at risk. At least 5 Fortune 500 companies are impacted, with early indicators suggesting the same flaw is likely present in many others. Aikido was the first to identify and disclose this vulnerability pattern, open sourcing open grep rules for all security vendors to trace this vulnerability. Google's own Gemini CLI repository was affected by this vulnerability pattern, and Google patched it within 4 days of Aikido's responsible disclosure. The pattern, untrusted user input, injected into prompts, AI agent executes privileged tools, secrets leaked, or workflows manipulated. Like, this is the pattern that we will be fighting forever until we fundamentally change how AI works, and that we can separate control plane out from the data plane so that the control plane can give the orders to the AI for what it's allowed to do, and the data is the untrusted user input. We don't have a way to do that today, and I don't know how any of the AI models are going to fix it. And this is an industry-wide, not a specific GitHub Action problem. But because you can look at GitHub Actions or anything open source, you can see the actions, you can see where the ones that are taking advantage of AI steps, so you can see which ones are easily exploitable, and you can go to exploit them. Now, if you add this up with some of the other things like prompt, like if you take the AI stuff and you combine it with some of the auto running actions things that other repos are doing with my previous, like, you're really in for a bad time in your repo if you're adding this to an already insecure settings of repos where you maybe have given AI write access to everything. First, confirmed real-world demonstrations that AI prompt injection can compromise CI/CD pipelines. So, this feels dubious. I feel like, we've been talking about this for a year now. Anyway, they're claiming credit. They can have the credit. That's fine. They're a great team. TLDR, how to see if you're affected. Option 1, use Aikido on your GitHub or GitLab repos. Aikido scans automatically to see if you are affected. This is available in the free version. Or option 2, run OpenGrep Playground with the open rules for detecting these issues on your GitHub Actions YAML file. I don't know how we use AI safely and securely in open source repos at all. Because most of the workflows I've seen that use AI are trying to automate a human task, which means they need right to something. They need a secret, or they need permissions to write something. They've got to do something. If they're just looking at something and giving you a thumbs up or thumbs down, then that has limited potential benefits. That has limited AI, what am I trying to say? AI is sold to us as a productivity booster for teams, for companies, and to do this safely, which I don't exactly have a prescription yet on exactly how to do all this safely, but to do this safely in the open right now, in an open source repo where everyone can see and everyone can give you a PR, I don't see how we do much of anything with AI right now. Like, to me, it's at best, you can use GitHub's built-in actions. GitHub's built-in like PR reviewer, which is not technically an action. You can use it as an action, but if you just enable it as a setting, it's not really running as a workflow. My assumption is that's a little bit safer than simply running actions. But I still feel like that there's some risk, there's potential risk there of jailbreaking. But I would assume that they are harder to jailbreak out of and that they have more least privilege than the average repo. I just wish I had some good news here. This is one I'm going to have to think and test a lot more, and maybe even talk with the Aikido team and see exactly what their tool is checking on. And so I will probably have to have another video on this one. But I just want you to know that this is a problem. It's not going away. It still exists in private repos. The best thing you can do today is to lock down all those settings I talked about earlier, locking down that only the default permissions in every GitHub Action workflow are read-only, that you manually specify the least privileged permissions in every workflow, that you don't allow any external committers that aren't added to your repo's committers, or not committers, to your repo's owner's file or your repo's contributors. If you're not adding someone there, go into that setting in your repo settings and tell it, don't allow anyone to auto run any action ever. If they're not given explicit permissions to the repo, they don't get actions run on their behalf. Bottom line, unless I manually approve it. Yes, it means more work for maintainers, but we're just living in a world where automation is too dangerous right now. It's too insecure. It's too easy for someone to give your AI or non-AI bad stuff and have it auto run and exfiltrate your secrets. I think that the better approach right now is to least privilege the secrets a little bit better and to scope it down. Maybe we do that with environments and we just create more documentation on how to use environments to isolate secrets, and we do it that way. But that means then that every repo with secrets has to go back and retroactively change all their secrets and add environments. And who's going to do that? Nobody's going to do that. Like 10% would do that, maybe. And so we're still left with millions of repos, all exposed. So I don't really have an easy fix for any of this. But you can be ahead of the game. And that's mostly done through permissions, not using pull request target, and setting down the repo settings. Now you know. All right. Thanks for joining me. Any last questions before I run? Just last minute questions while I take a sip of my tea. Actually, I've got 2 cups of tea. I've gone on for a while. We started late. Gone on for a while on this. And I repeat myself a lot. All right, so the last thing I'm going to mention is if you are not aware, I have courses, and you can get those at bret.courses. I'll put this on the screen. So I have courses, and I have the Discord right here. 25,000 people in Discord, all learning and talking about DevOps and working in DevOps. Come join us over there. And I try to live stream every Thursday, although during the holidays it's random. Next week, we are having another show. I'm going to have some guests on. We're going to talk about our favorite cloud native tech this year, and AI, of course, will be a topic. So come join me next week. Also, we've got some podcasts coming up soon. So you can just find all my content at bretfisher.com, or below. There should be links in the description. And I'll see you, if not next week, earlier than that on YouTube or the live stream or somewhere else. Ciao, everybody.